Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh live. First time live in a couple weeks. Excited to be back. And remember, this is your home for Pittsburgh Penguins news and analysis. You can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh, or you can catch us anywhere you get your podcast from. It's been a couple weeks, so instead of a week in review, we're going to do a month in review as of the month of December. To this point, talk a little bit about last night's loss to the Colorado Avalanche, and then look at what's coming up next for the Pittsburgh Penguins as they get closer and closer to that holiday break, as well as, for the first time in a couple weeks, my 3 stars of the week and all of your questions. So if you're tuned in live, make sure you drop in a question about anything Pittsburgh Penguins. We'll get to that at the end of the show, but got to kick things off with the December in review to this point. The Penguins are 2-2 in the month of December, a 5-4 overtime win last Tuesday against the Florida Panthers, a game in which the Pens had complete control over at one point with a 4-1 lead, even though they had been outplayed to that point, and then things came crashing down. Florida tied things up 4-4 before the Penguins get the overtime winner off the stick of Brian Rust. They followed that up with a back-to-back on Friday and Saturday, a 4-2 loss on Friday against the New York Rangers, in which Mike Sullivan was not pleased with their performance, and rightfully so. They did not look like the team that they had been over the last week and a half, and they lost to a team that was kind of falling throughout the standings in the New York Rangers. So a 4-2 loss on Friday. They bounced back with a great performance on Saturday night at PPG Paints Arena with a 5-2 win. And then, of course, last night, all their momentum was completely halted by, I'd say, the Colorado Avalanche. But in reality, it was halted by Mikko Rantanen, Cale Makar, and Nathan MacKinnon. And that was practically it. I mean, I guess you could throw Scott Wedgwood in there as well. He made a few really nice saves, but the Penguins just had no answers for the top line and the top defender of the Colorado Avalanche. That's where a lot of that game was won for Colorado, but it did take a bit of the wind out of the sails for the Pittsburgh Penguins. They had all the momentum seemingly after the second period because it was a 3-0 game. The Pens looked like they were out of it, and they started to climb back. Beautiful pass from Evgeni Malkin cross ice to Cody Glass. Nice to see him notch his first goal as a member of the Pittsburgh Penguins. And then it was the Michael Bunting show for the final 5 to 10 minutes of the second period. He gets into things with Devon Toews. He wants to be there to be a diving call on Devon Toews, and they never really showed much of a replay of that, but you could see why he would be a little bit angry, and you could also see why the referees made the call that they did, but he comes back and does the best thing he could do. 1, the penalty kill picks him up. They kill the penalty, and 2, he comes back and scores a goal late in the second period to pull the Penguins within 1. And they had all that momentum, like I mentioned, going into the third period. Unfortunately, and if you've been watching the Pittsburgh Penguins this season, and if you've been watching the Tip of the Ice-Burgh, you already know where I'm going with this. Unfortunately, they still trailed by 1 going into the third period, which meant odds were they weren't going to tie it. They weren't going to send it into overtime, and they certainly weren't going to come back and take the win. And I say that not because I don't have faith that the Penguins don't have the players to potentially pull off a comeback, but simply because they haven't done it. After last night's loss, they are now 1-14 on the season. No overtime losses. They haven't forced overtime. They've won 1 game when trailing after 2 periods of play. You can't win games like that. You can't win games convincingly like that. You can't win games consistently like that. You have to be better when you're looking at the face of adversity. They haven't been that this season. 1-14 is ridiculous. And you see exactly why, right? They were playing well. They had all the momentum. And then 3 minutes into the third period, Valeri Nichushkin just absolutely dances Tristan Jarry and the defender that he was going up against, which I will believe was Marcus Pettersson. And then the Penguins, who were 0-4 on the power play all night long, something Mike Sullivan highlighted as one of the biggest issues of last night's game. They go 0-2 in the final period after going down 4-2 in the game. You have to be able to fight back in some of these games. Now, some of it is on the players. I saw some really slow changes, and you look at that and you say, you're missing some opportunities. I mean, Erik Karlsson at one point in that third period went into the offensive zone in the midst of a line change. Understandably, they're not going to be right there with you on the rush, but he went into the offensive zone with speed. He turned back, waited, and all of a sudden, There's still nobody back in the offensive zone. They need to be quicker on the changes. They need to get into the action a little bit quicker. There were a couple of changes that I just didn't like last night. And I hate to bash on this guy in particular because I think he's been playing well throughout the past couple of weeks, but it's the same thing with Tristan Jarry. They go into the third period, you're down 3-2. The other team's going to get a chance because you're pushing, and the Penguins give up opportunities as it is, but when they're pushing to try to come back when losing in a game, they're going to give up those chances. Nichushkin got one. There was another one later in the period that Tristan Jarry gave up. I understand they're not all going to be easy saves, but you need to make the save in the timely moment. Tristan Jarry wasn't able to do that last night. And if you go onto moneypuck.com, it kind of illustrates that when he had negative 3.3 goals above expected against the Colorado Avalanche. So you have to be better at fighting back into these games. And it's not just a one-person thing. It's a whole team thing. If they keep doing this and if they can't erase leads because they've blown plenty of them, but if they can't erase any leads whenever they go into the third period trailing, I don't know how you expect this team to be able to fight whenever it comes to March and April, whenever you're hoping to potentially be in a dogfight for a playoff spot. But at the end of the day, 2-2 in the month of December, that ends a stretch of 9 out of 10 games where the Penguins played teams that were above 500. They finished that stretch 5-4-1. And when you look at that, 11 of a possible 20 points and a really, really tough schedule. You look at it and you say, okay, that's, especially considering what they were going into that stretch, you say, all right, that's a step in the right direction. But now, can you start to do what you did earlier in the season? Play well against teams below 500. As of right now, they're 6-2-2 against those teams, and they're going to start to play them coming up on the schedule, starting on Thursday with a matchup with the Montreal Canadiens. The Penguins are 2-0 against the Habs this year. You need to get back on the right track after that loss on Tuesday night. The best thing for you is to go up against a team that you know you've beaten twice already this season. They get that opportunity against Montreal on Thursday. It's a little bit of a different Montreal team. They have Patrick Laine, and that has kind of given them a little bit of a bump here over the past week or so. So it's going to be a little bit different, and those games were close between the Pens and the Habs earlier in the season. And in fact, in the first one, it was Lars Eller that was the reason the Penguins won, and he is long gone. So it's going to be a little bit different, but you need to take advantage and you need to continue your success against the Montreal Canadiens. After that, they have a Saturday matchup with the Ottawa Senators. And again, a team that's struggling this season, a team that is failing to meet expectations this season, but at the same time, they always give the Penguins fits. And the biggest reason is foot speed, right? The Ottawa Senators, and we saw it a little bit last night, that the Avalanche's foot speed was a problem for the Pittsburgh Penguins, particularly on the penalty kill for the Avs. They were in your face, up in your action, and the Penguins just couldn't handle it. The Senators are the same way, and that's why over the last couple of years, even though the Ottawa Senators have been struggling overall, they've seen a lot of success against the Pittsburgh Penguins. So that's going to be a tough matchup. And then next Tuesday, you have one of the few winning record teams that you're going to face leading up to Christmas coming into town with the LA Kings on WWE night, which should be pretty interesting. But the schedule gets a little bit lighter leading into the holidays. The Penguins need to take advantage and need to have a solid record throughout the rest of December to kind of build off of what they've been able to do over the past couple of weeks. I'm going to go over to my 3 stars of the week here. After that, we're going to take a quick break and we'll answer all of your questions. So make sure that you're getting them into the chat here if you're joined with us live on the Tip of the Ice-Burgh. But 3 stars of the week. Third star, we're going to start it off with the new guy, or at least the newest guy on the Pittsburgh Penguins. I don't know if I can call him a new guy anymore because he's missed a game due to injury. He scored game-winning goals, and he seems to be one of the bigger pieces of the Pittsburgh Penguins forward lineup. And that's going to be Phil Tomasino. He grabs the 3rd star of the week for the Pittsburgh Penguins. 3 games played, 1 goal, 1 assist over this past week. Has been very good, point blank, since coming to Pittsburgh. I was excited when they made the move to see if he got the opportunity that a lot of young players haven't gotten in Pittsburgh. And immediately, Mike Sullivan put him up on the second line with Evgeni Malkin. And you said, okay, this is a little different. This is something we haven't seen from the Penguins. This is something we haven't seen from Mike Sullivan. Usually, and Kelsey Surmatz, who we had on the show a couple weeks ago, alluded to this path. Usually, Young players have to come in a bottom six role and prove that they can be a role player and then earn their opportunities with a Malkin, with a Crosby. Tomasino at 23 years old, and he has more NHL experience than guys like Poulin that we talk about, guys like Puustinen that we talk about in those instances. Tomasino comes in and is immediately placed on the second line, a second line that over this season and last has been kind of a revolving door of wingers. And that's been the case for most of the forward lineup outside of the top line. There's only been about 3 or 4 players that have been on that. It is raining crazy outside. So if you can hear it, I apologize, but we'll try to go through it with this. But Tomasino has gone on that line and has kind of settled things down for Evgeni Malkin in a really strong way. He played great last night, coming back from that one missed game against Toronto. I thought that he was one of the better players, one of the better offensive play drivers for the Penguins, creating multiple chances, not just of his own when it comes to shooting the puck, but creating multiple chances for Evgeni Malkin. He created a great chance for Drew O'Connor that he wasn't able to put away. And I think he set up Cody Glass later in the game as well. So I really like what I've seen out of 53 on the Penguins. And for that, I'm going to give him the 3rd star of the week. 2nd star of the week, a guy that has been up and down all season long, but is really starting to come into his own and be, excuse me, exactly what you want him to be. That's Michael Bunting. 4 games played, 2 goals, 1 assist over the past week. He is fully engaged right now, which is something that we haven't been able to say about Michael Bunting all season long. Right now, he's at his best. And last night was a perfect example. He went after the Avs a lot last night, and that's during play, that's in between whistles, and obviously he took that penalty, which he didn't want to see because it looked like Drew O'Connor was going to get either a mini breakaway or potentially a 2-on-1. He took that penalty, but you know what he did? He tried to take somebody with him. Devon Taves did a good job of kind of ignoring him and walking away, but Michael Bunting was a thorn in the side of the Colorado Avalanche last night, and when the Penguins were playing their best last night, Michael Bunting was one of the most evident players on the ice. So that's huge. And then, of course, scores that massive goal in the second period to kind of be the cherry on top of a Michael Bunting-esque game for Michael Bunting. Add the fact that he got a game winner against his former team, the Toronto Maple Leafs, on Saturday, and that is why he is the 2nd star of the week. And to close things out, 1st star of the week, all role players here. Maybe not all bottom 6 guys because Bunting is bounced up and down. Obviously, I talked ad nauseum about Phil Tomasino being a top 6 guy for the Penguins right off the bat, but a lot of role players in this week's 3 stars of the week, and it rounds out with the 3rd line center, Blake Lizotte. 4 games played, 4 points in those games, 2 goals, 2 assists. He has stepped up in a massive way since the Lars Eller trade, being that 3rd line center that has kind of made you forget how long it took until they got Lars Eller last year to find somebody that could actually be capable of playing in that role at a consistent level. Now, again, it's only been, a month since Lars Eller was traded, but Blake Lizotte has looked really good in that role. And honestly, he's physical, he's fast, he's great on the forecheck, he's finishing opportunities. I mean, a wicked goal that he scored against Igor Shesterkin and the New York Rangers on Friday night. And he's working well with a lot of different line mates. And that is going to be the biggest task for anybody that is the 3rd line center for the Pittsburgh Penguins, because right now their roster is in flux night in and night out. The only time that it's going to remain consistent is if they win convincingly, which doesn't happen very often. Mike Sullivan is in a stage right now where he is flipping the lineup over day in and day out, trying to find new things. The latest thing is the power play that he's kind of thrown into a blender. I don't particularly like that, but that's not the point of this conversation. But Blake Lizotte has played well with Drew O'Connor. He's played well with Michael Bunting. He's played well with Cody Glass on his wing. He's played well with Anthony Beauvillier on his wing. He seems to just play his game no matter who he's playing with, and his game translates to different skill sets. And I think that is a great asset to have as a 3rd line center. He's been really good for the Pittsburgh Penguins. And because of that and his performance, he is the number 1 star of this week. So that's it. If you're watching us on YouTube, those are the 3 stars. Phil Tomasino at number 3, Michael Bunting at number 2, and Blake Lizotte at number 1. But we're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, answering all of your questions. So if you're tuned in live with us at Tip of the Ice-Burgh on YouTube, make sure you drop your question in the comment section and we'll talk about it right after this break. Welcome back to the tip of the Ice-Burgh Live. Short break there. We got a lot of great questions in the comment section already. And if you have one and you're tuned in live with us, make sure you check out and throw yours in the comment section as well. We'll try to get to as many as we can before we go here today. But let's kick things off with Dave, who asked this right off the bat at 2:03. We went live at 2:05, so shout out to Dave for getting in here early. Says, how bad was the second Avs goal last night when both Letang and Karlsson went behind the net to the same corner? What are they doing paired together? Well, part of what they were doing paired together was probably just in the midst of a line change that happened in, if I believe that was in the first period. But yeah, you don't want to see both defensemen kind of pinch after the same guy, especially behind the net. But the thing is, it did work, right? It got on Letang's stick. He took the puck. They got it away from the guy. And then Letang turned it over. What I was more upset about is, why is Erik Karlsson still pinning somebody up against the wall 10 seconds after the puck is gone, instead of going back and, I don't know, playing his position where the goal was eventually scored? So I don't like those two on the ice together. Just in general, I don't think that was a pairing that was thrown out to the ice from what it looked like. It was in between a change and they got caught. But yeah, that pairing shouldn't be out there together very often, especially if they're in the defensive zone, Dave. So yeah, it was a bad goal. There was a lot of bad goals last night. Penguins defensively were not good, especially in the first period. And I would say everybody on that defense core, with the exception of Marcus Pettersson, made a blatant, what are you doing? Throw your hands up in the air, get very mad at the television turnover at some point in that first period yesterday. That includes Pickering, whose turnover led to a short breakaway that was saved by Tristan Jarry. That includes Grzelcyk, who had a horrible pinch leading to a 2-on-1 in the Avs' first goal of the game. So the defense definitely regressed yesterday and did not have themselves a good game. The second goal was no different for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Let's go over to Austin's question. Austin says, what are the chances of the Pens being a lottery team if they don't fire Sullivan this season? I've liked watching winning hockey, but hope to get a decent pick out of it for all of the suffering. Yeah, it's been a up and down season. This has been a nice stretch of winning. Whether or not that continues is a question that remains to be seen. I don't think they're going to fire Sullivan, but could they be a lottery team with Sullivan? Yes, I do think they can be, because right now I don't think he's contributing more than any other coach would to winning. I think a lot of it is on the team and the talent of the team right now. Now, Sullivan, with what he said on Friday and with the way that they ended up responding on Saturday, you can say that contributed to the win there, but that just hasn't happened a lot this season. So if they fire Sullivan, I don't know how that changes, because it depends on who they bring in, right? Do they bring up the guy that they have down, Kirk McDonald, from the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins? Do they bring in a different coach that's currently sitting on the sidelines? Do they just make, one of Mike Vellucci or David Quinn the head coach? And what does that do for the Penguins? Does that send them closer to the lottery, or does that send them, closer to the playoffs and the 13th, 14th, or 15th overall pick? That remains to be seen. But I think that at the end of the day, I'd rather watch winning hockey. I understand the position the Penguins are in right now, which is the better draft pick you get, the quicker this rebuild is going to be. But when you have 87 and 71 and 58 out there, I still want to watch winning hockey, because it is hard to watch losing hockey. And for somebody like me who watches every single game, even if I don't catch it live, I'm watching the replay, I'm watching the recording, I'd prefer to watch winning hockey. And if they're just not good enough and they get a good pick out of it, then that's a bonus for the suffering. If they end up close to the playoffs because they, fought hard like last season, I honestly would like to see that as well. Either way, I think the Penguins this season, because of the talent out there, they're going to have a top 20 pick. Even if they make the playoffs, I have a hard time believing they're going to win a series. But again, that's way far down the road. And I think it doesn't make a difference if you fire Sully or not, as far as to where you're at when it comes to the NHL lottery, because there's so many different variables that could go into how the Penguins react whenever that happens, if it happens, which I highly doubt it will. Let's go over to Christopher Hart, who says, Steve Dangle said it best when the Penguins beat the Maple Leafs. Do you feel like you really won that game? Yeah. The 2 points went in the standings. They don't ask how. They ask how many at the end of the season. There's no style points involved into whether or not you make it to the NHL playoffs. It's just a matter of how many points did you collect over 82 games. So did I feel like the Penguins won that game? Yes, because they did win that game. Yeah, the Toronto Maple Leafs were a pretty good team, but the Penguins, I thought, played a very good game. So, maybe there were moments in that game where the Leafs just looked to be the better team. Probably because they are the better team. On paper, they are the better team. But the Penguins, on any given night and on that night, beat the Maple Leafs. And it might not have looked pretty, but they came away with the 2 points. So at the end of the day, that's all I'm looking at as to whether or not did it feel like the Penguins beat the Maple Leafs. Yeah, it did. It felt like the Penguins beat the Panthers as well. Should they have last week? Probably not. They were outplayed from pillar to post in that game against the Florida Panthers, excuse me. But did they come away with the 2 points? Yeah. Is it sustainable to play that way? No. But on that night, they got the 2 points and they got the win. And that's all you can ask for from the Pittsburgh Penguins. Let's go to Evan, who's been excited about this live stream since it was announced. Says, I like that they put Cody Glass up on Malkin's line last night, and it looks like they might do it next game, but was it a bad idea to split up that Bunting Glass line that was doing so well? Was it a bad idea? Maybe. It might lead to that third line not having as good of performances as they were having together, but we've seen on multiple occasions, not just this season, but last season as well, even if the third line is performing well, they want Malkin's line to perform better. They want Crosby's line to perform better. So if the third line's your best line on this team, the way it's constructed, you're probably not winning a lot of hockey games. So if there's a player on that third line that's performing really well and can slot in on that second line and help improve Malkin's performance, improve Crosby's performance on the top line, Mike Sullivan's always going to end up pulling that lever. And that's what he did last night. Drew O'Connor, there's been some games in this drought where he's looked like he is right around the net, right around scoring that goal and finally ending his drought. Friday, for example, it looked like he was finally going to light the lamp. And he just didn't. It was still a good game, but he just didn't light the lamp. Yesterday was the opposite, where he is so far past getting anything good to happen. That's why it stinks that Michael Bunting ended up taking that penalty, because that might have been the chance for Drew O'Connor to get the monkey off his back, to get the goal, to end the drought, and to maybe turn around his season. But 3 goals in 30 games for Drew O'Connor, and games like last night where it just looks like he's chasing it way too much. You can't have a player like that bring down a line with Evgeni Malkin and Phil Tomasino, who've been playing pretty good hockey. So what you do is you put Glass up there, and it works, right? It creates the first goal of the game. It opens the door for the Penguins to start the comeback. And yes, it does affect the Lizotte, Bunting, and at that point, O'Connor line. But that's what's going to happen whenever you're built the way the Penguins have been built for the last 20 years. The best players are typically going to go up in the lineup if the top of the lineup is struggling. That's why in 2017, was it 2017? No, in 2016, the Penguins were so good because the top line was working well, the second line was working well, and they were working well without Phil Kessel, which allowed the Penguins to keep Kessel on that third line with Carl Hagelin, with Nick Bonino. But if that's not the case, as we saw in 2017, where did Phil Kessel end up going? Right back up on that second line alongside Evgeni Malkin. So it's something that Mike Sullivan has done throughout his entire tenure, which is reaching 9 years tomorrow. And it's not something that I'm surprised that he went back to. Let's go to Evan's second question here. It says, it's been a little quiet regarding Rutger McGroarty. How long or what will it take for him to get back into the NHL lineup? Well, I mean, what will it take for just him to continue to improve? That's what he's been doing in Wilkes-Barre. He's been continuously improving day after day, stacking, similar to what he did in the NHL preseason. I think they're going to be a little bit more patient with him because he did get that opportunity early in the season and it didn't go great. He looked like he wasn't quite ready for NHL hockey. So I think they're going to let him work on some things. And I'm sure there's a checklist that the Penguins have because they do it very often with some of these young guys. There's a checklist of things they want to see before they end up pulling the trigger and pulling a guy back up. And I think that that's probably the same case here with Rutger McGroarty. As far as how long, again, I, first of all, expected him to be a little bit more of a polished product coming into this season. And there's no problem that he's not, right? He's 20 years old. It's exciting that Owen Pickering at 20 years old is more polished than we expected him to be. But that doesn't mean if he wasn't, that all is lost, right? So I think that maybe by the end of the season, depending on how it goes, because if there's a lot of trades if Michael Bunting gets traded, or if Drew O'Connor gets traded, or if, a Cody Glass gets traded because he's playing well, or if Nola Chari gets traded and there's opportunities, I wouldn't be surprised if they try to get Rucker McGroarty a little bit more playing time. But as of right now, it doesn't feel like that door is open for McGroarty. It feels like they want him to continue to mature at the AHL level and check off some of those boxes before they look to bring him back up. Let's go to Iconicer, who says Sullivan continuing to throw Achari out there and Hayes while Puljujarvi sits is driving me up one wall and down another. Is he even watching the games? I mean, this is something that I have gone back and forth on, because early in the season, Nola Chari was playing some very good hockey. And I said, you can't take him out of the lineup because he's doing a lot of things that a lot of players on this team outside of Nola Chari can do. He's penalty killing very well. He's blocking more shots than everybody. He's playing more physical than everybody, but I don't know if that's necessarily the case anymore. Blake Lizotte has been very good in all of those situations. I also think that Puljujarvi is somebody who plays physical as well. Now, he doesn't block as many shots. He's not as good on the penalty kill, but having both Achari and Hayes out there, and in particular, having Achari out there as fourth line center is just something that on certain days, yesterday being one of them, it just kills momentum. And it's not helping Anthony Beauvillier either. I think Anthony Beauvillier has had an underrated season, but I don't think he's going to find success playing on a line with Nola Chari and Kevin Hayes. That just doesn't mix, because Beauvillier is somebody who has a lot of speed, likes to play physically, but for the most part is trying to play a speed game. That doesn't mesh with either Kevin Hayes or Nola Chari, but for some reason they're enamored with keeping both of them in the lineup. We said the same thing about Matt Nieto last week on the full show, but they took Nieto out. Eventually you'd think that they have to take one of Achari or Hayes out if they continue to perform at this level, but I just don't know if it's going to happen. This is one of those Mike Sullivan doesn't care. Mike Sullivan wants to see these guys in the lineup, and there was a report by, I believe it was Josh Yohe of The Athletic earlier this week that said, Puljujarvi did have a major surgery just about a year ago, so maybe they're trying to make sure that he doesn't play in 82 games, that they're not overworking him. Listen, we're over a quarter of the way into the season, and when he's been playing as well as he has, you let him go until he tells you that he's struggling. That's what they should be doing, not trying to save him from himself, because he's a year and a half removed, including a full offseason removed from that double hip surgery, and it hasn't shown, at least on the ice, that it's slowing him down. So I agree with you, Iconicer. I'd rather see Puljujarvi play. I'm not sure if we're going to get that opportunity unless somebody else comes out of the lineup due to injury, because he loves Kevin Hayes. And for what it's worth, Kevin Hayes at times has looked good. I don't like him on the top power play unit with Crosby and Letang, but, to each their own. I guess Sullivan does. But I think for the most part, you would say having Puljujarvi in there would be a much greater benefit to the Penguins lineup than putting Achari and Hayes in every single game. Let's go to some of these other questions here. Let's go to Evan, who says, are you worried that they're pushing Pickering too much too early? Don't want to replicate P.O. Joseph in that situation. The one main difference that I will say between Owen Pickering and P.O. Joseph is Owen Pickering has the body to withstand the physicality of the NHL, whereas when P.O. Joseph came up, he didn't. He was light. You could tell he could get pushed around a lot. That doesn't happen with Pickering. So I think that helps. I am still a little tentative. I said it last week, Evan. I'm sure that's what you're referencing, is that whenever I said Matt Grzelcyk needs to be taken down in the lineup, I said I don't know who you'd put up there. Pickering, it might be a little too early. But again, that's a 20-year-old. Can he handle it? He's shown in the past that he can handle these high leverage situations. That's what he did all throughout juniors with the Swift Current Broncos. That's what he did earlier this season with the AHL's Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins. So I am a little worried. I do think there are some material differences, though, between this situation and the P.O. Joseph situation. Joseph, I just don't think... Well, let's put it this way. Joseph was a little less developed physically, and being put in that situation kind of stunted his development. Whereas I think because Pickering is more developed physically at his age and at his size, I think it'll help him continue to grow, and it won't stunt his growth if he stays on that top pairing. So again, we'll see how it goes. It might only be a 4 or 5 game experiment at this point in the season, but I thought he looked really good on Saturday against Toronto. I thought he struggled a little bit yesterday, probably his worst game since coming up. But at the same time, the entire defense struggled, and he did have a couple of shifts there where you looked at it and said, okay, he's still playing at that level. He's just made a couple of mistakes, one being the penalty, the puck over the glass. You can't be doing that. It was a tough situation. The boards were taken away, and he tried to change the angle on it, but you can't take that penalty in the defensive zone. And of course, the turnover in the offensive zone that led to the partial breakaway for the Colorado Avalanche. Let's go over to Christopher Hart, and we're going to be talking about this at length in tomorrow's episode, so I'll just touch on it here. Christopher asks, is DOC getting traded or being kept? That all depends on how DOC responds, because he hasn't scored in 24 straight games. That's not going to get you very much in the trade market. And I don't think the Penguins are interested in trading away Drew O'Connor for a conditional 7th round pick. That just makes no sense if you're the Pittsburgh Penguins, especially because he's shown that he can perform much better than what he has. Now, if there's a team that knows that and takes that into account and is willing to trade you similar to what the Penguins traded away for a guy like Phil Tomasino, and somebody saying, hey, listen, we'll trade you a 4th, we'll trade you a 5th, then maybe that ends up being a conversation. But I think there's more of a chance that he gets traded than there is that he gets kept by the end of this season, just simply because, one, I don't think he's staying in this slump for much longer. And two, I think that on an expiring contract, he's going to be worth a lot to a contending team. Let's go to a couple other questions here. IR3K says, I've really been noticing Karlsson's skating and transition game lately. His pass yesterday was ridiculous. I watch a lot of different teams, and you don't see many D-man do what Erik Karlsson can do. 100%. And it's gotten better and better. Just looking down. It's getting better and better right now, with the game, every single game. At the beginning of the season, that's what was missing. He's never going to be a great defender, right? He wasn't in his prime. He certainly isn't going to be when he's reaching his mid-30s, especially after the injuries that he's sustained throughout his season and his career. But a lot of the stuff he does is not replicated. It can't be replicated by other players. So he is special. And whenever he has those games, you look at it and you shake your head in awe, because some of the things he does is so incredibly special, but then some of the mistakes he makes are mistakes that you look around and you say, I don't know if any other NHL defenseman would make that kind of a boneheaded mistake. It's kind of the Kris Letang situation on steroids. And that's what we've been saying for the past year and a half is Kris Letang was, hey, you take the good with the bad. Sometimes you're going to get really good Kris Letang. Sometimes you're going to get really bad Kris Letang. The same can be said for Erik Karlsson, except the good offensively is just a level above what you got from Kris Letang at his best. But the bad defensively is several layers below the worst that you can get with Kris Letang. So his skating, his transition game, when it's on, it's very fun to watch. It's enticing, and it helps the Penguins in a massive, massive way. When he's not on, that's not great. That it's actively hurting the team, which is never great. Let's go over to this question from John Powell, who says, any chance a Jarry trade can happen before season's end? Blomqvist should be up here full-time and being the starter. Still, we'll never understand the extension that Tristan Jarry got. I'm not going to go to bat again for the Tristan Jarry extension because I've done it on multiple occasions. At the time, that was the move. You can argue about the term, you can argue about the money, but at the time, that was the move, and that was the going rate for a starting goaltender that offseason. And the same could be said for Ryan Graves. Unfortunately, both of them have backfired to tremendous degrees that nobody saw coming. And if you say you did, you're simply lying, and you're looking back on it with 2020 hindsight vision, and you never would have seen Tristan Jarry falling off to the level that he did early this season specifically, and you never would have seen the season coming from Ryan Graves last year. But as for whether or not a Jarry trade can happen before season's end, I've been of the belief that it's very unlikely throughout the year, but then I just look at what the Colorado Avalanche did 2 days ago. They have entirely changed their goaltending tandem in season this year. They started the year with let me see if I can remember the names, Justice Anunin and Alexander Georgiev. And they ended up with Scott Wedgwood, who we saw last night, and Mackenzie Blackwood. Now, is it a material difference? No, they didn't go out there and get a great goaltender. But as you mentioned here, John, the Penguins don't need a great goaltender in return because they got a young guy that deserves some more opportunities at the NHL level. Now, am I pounding the table and upset that Blomqvist isn't at the NHL level right now? Not entirely. Would I like to see him? Yes, don't get me wrong. But right now, playing behind the defense that the Penguins have might do more harm than good when it comes to being at the NHL level. So while they try to figure out the defense, I'm fine with Joel Blomqvist playing behind a much better team for that level at the American Hockey League. But, that is only going to last so long. Next year, Blomqvist needs to be on the NHL roster. At the end of this year, you can make the argument that Blomqvist needs to be at the NHL roster. And if Jarry's traded, that obviously opens up the hole and opens up the space for it. But again, I don't know if that trade happens, specifically because the Penguins won't be wanting to take salary back if possible. And they probably don't want to be taking another goaltender back because they want more opportunity for Joel Blomqvist. So do I think it happens? Again, I'll never say never, especially considering what we just saw the Colorado Avalanche do, but I do think it is unlikely for this season. Let's go to Evan, who says, sorry for the multiple questions. No, it's perfectly fine. When I say we're going to answer every question, I mean every single question that we can. And Evan, ask as many as you want because you're always here. So I'm always going to answer your questions. Says, sorry for the multiple questions, but is there any update on a potential trade with Nils Höglander? And what would your ideal but realistic trade package be for the young forward? I haven't heard anything newer than what we heard last week from Elliot Friedman, what we heard from Rick Dollywall. I believe that's his name. But at the same time, I can understand why, right? I mean, right now is not prime trade season. We've seen a couple of trades come through. That's because there's been so much parity this season. It's not prime trade season, though. There's no deadline that is impending that's going to speed things up, that's going to make people a little bit more drastic in what they do. So I don't think that it's something that right now is going to change all that much, but I've heard basically what everybody else has heard to this point. It is Penguins are interested, and at the same time, the Canucks are interested in shopping him, and you can tell that based on really the fact that he's getting no opportunity there. What would my ideal but realistic trade package be for Nils Höglander? It would be, somebody else throws in here Marcus Pettersson for Nils Höglander. No way at all would it be 1-for-1 because Marcus Pettersson is a 20-plus minute a night. You can count on him. Top 4 defenseman on every single team in the NHL. Nils Höglander is a young kid with some upside, but a young kid with some upside that's playing 8 or 9 minutes a night right now and is having a really bad season. So it's not going to be 1-for-1. If anything, it's probably Höglander. I would imagine a decently high pick if you're including, or if it's for Marcus Pettersson, it's going to include a second or a first round pick, another decent prospect, and Nils Höglander. That's what I would look at if I was Kyle Dubas, and that's what I would expect it to be at if it's Marcus Pettersson and Nils Höglander as the two seminal pieces of a trade. I would expect it's a high draft pick. I would expect it's a pretty decent prospect as well, because Marcus Pettersson, even on the last year of his contract, is going to be one of the best defensemen available all season long for some of these teams. So yeah, I would like to see the Penguins go out and get Nils Höglander. I would, because I think that he's shown that he has a very high ceiling. He's done it before at the NHL level, 20-plus goals last year, and he plays with a little bit of an edge. I said, I believe it was last week, that him and Michael Bunting and Rekar McGroarty all on the same team would be a heck of a lot of fun going forward. But I haven't heard anything else besides what you've probably heard as well. Let's go to IR3K again, who says, Nicholas Robertson to Pittsburgh needs to happen. Fits Dubas' plan. He recently got benched for Nylander, which, as we know, is a very low bar. Obviously talking about Alex Nylander and not William Nylander up there in Toronto. Yeah, the Nick Robertson situation is one that I kind of checked out of for a little while because it got hot and heavy during the preseason whenever everything was happening, and in the offseason as well. But as far as this year, I've kind of checked out of it a little bit. But Nick Robertson's another guy that I was very interested in. Honestly, of the two, I'd probably still want Höglander. Robertson has the higher offensive upside in my eyes, but Höglander is a little bit more of a complete package. So I'd still probably rather have Nils Höglander. But again, you can't get all of them, and you might not be able to get any of them. But so if you're making a list, Nick Robertson should be included in it as well. But that's going to do it for this episode of Tip of the Ice-Burgh Live. Thank you so much to everybody for tuning into this one. Remember, you can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, or you can check us out anywhere you get your podcast from. We'll see you guys next time.